the evening of November 18th, 1987, a horrific quadruple homicide occurred in Ina, Illinois that remains unsolved to this day. The victims were Russell Keith Dardeen and his pregnant wife, Ruby Elaine Dardeen, their son, and their newborn daughter. Police discovered the gruesome scene after Keith had failed to report to work. Both Ruby and their son had been brutally beaten, and Ruby had been beaten so severely in fact that she went into labor, leading to the death of their newborn daughter. The consensus is that the killings likely occurred the day before the bodies were discovered. Initially, the suspicion had fell on Keith as a potential suspect. However, the investigation took a shocking turn when Keith's lifeless body was found in a nearby field. He had been shot and subjected to a horrifying mutilation of his genitals. His car was found near the police station in Benton, and forensic evidence indicated that he had been killed shortly after his family. Despite intensive investigation, no clear motive or suspects were identified in this gruesome quadruple homicide. The case sent shockwaves to the local community, already on edge due to a series of murders in the preceding years. Rumors of satanic involvement and other motives were ruled out, leaving investigators with an unsolved mystery that still haunts the area. In the 2000s, serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells claimed responsibility for the crime, but he was never charged, and doubts persist about the veracity of his confession. The Dardeen family's tragic deaths remain a chilling cold case that continues to perplex investigators and unsettle the community in Ina. Keith and Elaine Dardeen, known by their middle names, were a couple that was residing in Ina, Illinois. Keith, originally from Mount Carmel, worked as a treatment plant operator at the Wren Lake Water Conservancy District, and Elaine from Albion had a job in an office supply store in Mount Vernon. They were actively involved in a local Baptist church where Keith sang and Elaine played the piano. In 1987, Elaine became pregnant with their second child, and they planned to name the baby either Ian or Casey. However, they were also considering a move due to the increasing violence in the area. Keith in particular expressed a desire to return to Mount Carmel, even if he couldn't secure a job there, as he believed Ina was becoming far too dangerous. The region had seen a significant rise in violent incidents, with 15 homicides in Jefferson County over the past 2 years. One notable case was that of Thomas Odell, a Mount Vernon teenager who had murdered his parents and 3 siblings in 1985. This violence had left the residents in the area fearful and stressed, and Keith's protective instincts grew even stronger after a 10-year-old girl was raped and murdered nearby in May of 1987. The Dardeens' decision to leave Ina was influenced not only by their growing family, but also by concerns about safety in the community that had been plagued by violence. This context of rising crime and their desire for a safer environment makes the Dardeen family tragedy all the more tragic and perplexing. Local law enforcement agencies did in fact collaborate with the Illinois State Police to conduct thorough investigations into the crime, and a dedicated team of 30 detectives worked diligently pursuing leads and conducting interviews with approximately over 100 individuals. Unfortunately, none of their investigative efforts yielded any substantial results. In the initial stages of the investigation, a man who had been taken into custody was subsequently released after questioning. Similarly, a co-worker of Keith Dardeen, who was reported to have had a dispute with him, was cleared of any involvement. Notably, those who were acquainted with the Dardeens only had positive things to say about the family. While a small amount of marijuana was discovered in their trailer, it was insufficient to suggest any involvement in drug dealing. In fact, law enforcement even considered the possibility that the marijuana might have been inadvertently left behind by the perpetrators. Importantly, the autopsies conducted on the victims also revealed no presence of drugs or alcohol in their systems at the time of death. The coroners determined that the time of death for all of the Dardeens occurred within approximately an hour of each other. The bodies inside the trailer had been killed approximately 12 hours before their discovery, while Keith Dardeen had been deceased for an estimated 24 to 36 hours prior to being found. This raised questions about the circumstances of Keith's death, as his body was located separately from the trailer. It was posited that he might have been killed at a different location separate from the family. Inside the trailer, it appeared that the perpetrator had taken the time to place Elaine's body in bed alongside her children's bodies and had made an effort to clean the scene, indicating a lack of urgency to get away. This level of meticulousness led investigators to theorize that the crime might have occurred during the night. And it should be noted that the trailer's location on Route 37, which was a busy state highway, made it completely visible from Interstate 57, situated nearly 2,000 feet to the west at the time. The question of whether there was one lone assailant or multiple individuals involved remains unanswered. The news of the killings heightened the already existing fear among local residents, leading many of them to adopt visible precautions in their daily routines. A common sight became shotguns prominently displayed in vehicles' gun racks as people went about their business. Even after high school basketball games, the students opted to wait inside the school building for their parents instead of engaging in their usual outdoor socializing. And this shift in behavior underscored the pervasive unease that was gripping the community at the time. In the early stages of the investigation, law enforcement's initial reports were scant and occasionally contradictory, contributing to the rapid spread of rumors. The respective county coroners held differing opinions on the cause of Keith's death, with some suggesting a head injury inflicted when he was forcibly removed from a vehicle, while others suspected gunshot wounds. And I personally want to add a note here that I don't understand how it's possible for two people or multiple people who are certified to be coroners or qualified to be coroners to not agree on a cause of death. And how are gunshot wounds and head trauma from a car, from getting removed from a car, of all things, how are those in any way confused with one another? How can you not absolutely know the difference between the two? Anyway, the circumstances surrounding Elaine's tragic childbirth potentially occurring posthumously gave rise to unsettling stories and theories. And this includes the disturbing notion that their daughter Casey had been forcibly extracted from her womb. These unsettling details, along with the mutilation of Keith's genitals, fueled speculation of satanic rituals and ritualistic sacrifice. Locals were curious if this was linked to the crime, and this further amplified fears within the community. Additionally, some conjectured that the crime, along with 3 other unsolved local murders, might be the work of a regional serial killer. Dr. Richard Garrison, a family physician who also serves as the Jefferson County coroner, revealed that many of his patients had engaged him in conversations about the case. Expressing their deep disturbance, one resident living in close proximity to the Dardeens trailer described his struggles with sleeplessness and a significant weight loss due to the stress that was induced by the case. Similarly, the daughter of the Dardeens' landlord confessed years later to keeping her bedroom light on through the night while reading, a testament to her enduring fear. Robert Lewis, however, the Franklin County coroner, held a different perspective. He believed that the fear was completely unwarranted. He opined that there was no rational basis for the near hysteria that was gripping the community, and he characterized it as people needlessly frightening each other. Such an intense fear had reached a point where individuals who even ran out of gas within the county would refrain from seeking assistance in nearby residences. Instead, they would choose to walk to the nearest highway and hitch a ride out of pure apprehension. Furthermore, investigators failed to uncover any evidence that suggested extramarital affairs involving either Keith or Elaine, which might have potentially driven a jealous rage. While the discovery of sports score papers in the house led to speculation about Keith possibly having incurred gambling debts, his mother, Joanne Dardeen, informed police that her son was notably frugal. So frugal, in fact, that he would even go to the extent of reselling 50-cent cans of soda at work to contribute to his young son's college fund. Despite the widespread fear that enveloped the community, Robert Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, harbored the belief that the Dardeens were not randomly targeted. He expressed his conviction that the crime was a deeply personal and deliberate act. Moreover, a law enforcement expert specializing in cults dispelled the rumor that Satanists were responsible in any way, as such groups often engaged in more extensive body mutilation, organ harvesting, and the placement of symbols and lit candles at crime scenes, none of which were present at the Dardeens trailer. While police acknowledged the possibility that the Dardeens were intentionally singled out, they also considered the scenario of mistaken identity by the perpetrator or perpetrators. Joanne Dardeen herself later contemplated alternative motives, suggesting that someone might have pressured Keith to engage in drug-related activities, and upon his refusal, resentment could have driven the assailants to commit this horrendous act. Alternatively, she pondered that the possibility of someone maybe having pursued Elaine romantically, only to be rebuffed, leading to a violent outburst against both victims. However, concrete answers remain elusive. Determining the motive behind the assailant's actions posed as a significant challenge in this case. Notably, the back door had been left open, and there was no evidence of forced entry into the residence. Furthermore, a VCR and a portable camera were plainly visible in the living room, and elsewhere in the house, cash and jewelry were equally accessible and remained untouched. These circumstances cast a doubt that robbery was a primary motive, and it also is worth mentioning that Elaine had not been subject to any sexual assault or rape, according to the county coroner. In a parallel narrative, another serial killer from Texas soon became the focal point of interest for investigators in Illinois. On the final day of 1999, Tommy Lynn Sells committed a horrifying act by slashing the throats of two girls near Del Rio, Texas. Remarkably, one of the girls survived and played a pivotal role in identifying him. Subsequently, Sells was convicted and handed a death sentence for his gruesome role in the murder, as well as another heinous killing early in 1999 involving a girl from San Antonio, Texas. During this period, while awaiting trial for the initial murder, he began confessing to a string of other murders. He said that he had perpetrated while wandering across the country, sometimes relying on hitchhiking or hopping freight trains as his mode of travel. Among these confessions was a tragic case of the Dardeen family. Sells admitted to remembering the specifics of this particular crime, although he acknowledged that he had blocked out many of the details of the other crimes that he had committed, which he attributed to a coping mechanism stemming from the sexual abuse he endured as a child in Missouri. In the mid 1980s, Sells primarily resided near St. Louis, approximately 90 miles northwest of Jefferson County. He sustained himself by earning income through various means, including employment at traveling carnivals and fairs. He did day labor and he would commit theft. For the later pursuit, he often relied on hitchhiking rides with truckers or hopping freight trains, rarely having a set destination. He described his unpredictable journey by stating, "Anywhere a ride was going, I was headed that way. I might be in Illinois today and Oklahoma tomorrow," reflecting the transient nature of his existence. It was through these unconventional modes of transportation that Sells became acquainted with the Ina area, he claims. During one of these trips through Jefferson County in November 1987, he claimed in a 2010 account to have encountered Keith at a truck stop near Mount Vernon, or in an alternate version, at a local pool hall. However, in both renditions, he claims that Keith extended an invitation for dinner at his home. Initially, Sells had intended to continue his journey, but he asserted that Keith's alleged sexual proposition that he had made after dinner included suggesting a threesome with Elaine triggered an outburst of anger from him. Under duress and with a firearm, Sells compelled Keith to drive to the location where his life would tragically end. Sells proceeded to commit the acts of violence, including the mutilation, against Keith before returning to the Dardeens' trailer, where he perpetrated further violence upon Elaine and Peter, who were unfortunate witnesses to the horror. Sells maintained that his actions were driven by an uncontrollable rage ignited by Keith's alleged sexual proposition, which spiraled to the point of brutality. He implied that this uncontrollable fury explained his decision to end the life of the infant Elaine had given birth to during the course of the crime. And in a third version of events, Sells omitted the encounter with Keith and the sexual proposition altogether. According to this account, he disembarked from a freight train near Ina, and upon spotting the Dardeen trailer adorned with a "for sale" sign, seized the opportunity for violence. After consuming alcohol and biding his time, he knocked on the door and deceived Keith into believing that he was interested in purchasing the trailer, and subsequently he overpowered Keith, coercing him into binding and gagging his wife and son with duct tape. At gunpoint, he forced Keith to drive his car to a nearby field where he committed the gruesome acts of violence, including the mutilation of Keith's body, and Sells even claimed to have uttered the horrifying threats of telling Keith that he would take the severed body part back to Elaine before ultimately ending Keith's life. He claims that upon returning to the trailer, he subjected Elaine to rape and subjected Peter and Elaine and the newborn to their horrific fate. Following the brutal acts, he cleaned up the crime scene before driving away in Keith's car to Benton. In the eyes of some investigators, Tommy Lynn Sells' execution in 2014 by the state of Texas was seen as justice, albeit indirect, for the Dardeen family. Despite never being officially charged with the murders, he remained the prime suspect, as asserted by Jefferson County State's Attorney Douglas Hoffman shortly after Sells' execution. Sheriff Roger Mulch shared his beliefs, supported by the county deputy sheriff who interviewed Sells in his Texas jail cell, as Sells appeared privy to the details of the crime that had been kept confidential. Nevertheless, there lingered a degree of uncertainty, as Sells had a track record of embellishing his accounts, a tendency to cast doubt on the validity of many of the confessions he made. Some investigators, while acknowledging that Sells' narrative generally aligned with the known facts of the case, it also pointed out that much of what he had disclosed had already been reported publicly. And then I want to add another personal note. I think with how much information they had put out, and with the 3 different versions of the story that he gave police, the 3 different accounts of the way that things had unfolded and the way that he changed his story 3 times, I want to say the same thing. I think that he probably figured out from newspapers or something and changed his story as the years went on to better align with the way that the events unfolded as told by public information. When he was pressed for specifics that had not been disclosed to the media, his reliability completely waned off. His assertion regarded the seat in which Keith was shot, and it contradicted the available evidence that we have. Furthermore, when asked about the positioning of Elaine's body, he initially provided an incorrect response before subsequently offering a correct one, leaving room for skepticism as to whether or not it was merely just a lucky guess. In an interview in 2010 with the Southern Illinoisan, Sells addressed his doubts surrounding his confessions, acknowledging, "Look, I know people got their doubts." He went on to respond with some of those doubts, arguing, "They say there's no physical evidence tying me to the Dardeens, but there wasn't for any of them because they wasn't looking for me. I moved and I was always transient." In Texas, authorities had confirmed that Sells had been responsible for 22 murders. However, they suspected that, much like another Texas serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, he may have confessed to crimes that he did not commit in a calculated effort to avoid the death penalty and exploit the legal system's leniencies. In Illinois, law enforcement sought to bring Sells to Ina, hoping to test his familiarity with the area and the locations relevant to the crimes. Sells claimed that he could provide insights into missing evidence. However, Texas law prohibited prisoners on death row from being taken out of state, and authorities were unwilling to make an exception in this case. So consequently, murder charges were not filed in Illinois due to the insufficient evidence. Beyond the realm of law enforcement, doubts about Sells' confession extended to friends and family of the Dardeens. They found certain aspects of his claims completely implausible. For instance, they questioned whether Keith would have invited a stranger he had just met from out of town to have dinner with his family, especially in the midst of heightened fear following a series of local killings over the preceding years. One of his friends specifically expressed skepticism, saying, "If he wouldn't let a young girl in to use the phone, he wouldn't let a 22-year-old man in." And this was in reference to Sells' age at the time. Additionally, Sells' assertion that Keith had made homosexual advances toward him was met with complete disbelief. Those close to Keith had never observed any indication of such an interest, and the initial police investigation found no evidence to support this claim at all. Detectives who interviewed Sells believed that if he had indeed committed the Dardeen murders, they may have fabricated this detail to rationalize the crime, a tactic that he frequently employed in confessing to other crimes, often including similar stories to portray the victims as having provoked him. And in wrapping up this puzzling story, we find ourselves deep in the mystery of the Dardeen family tragedy, where things aren't always crystal clear, and despite the spine-chilling confessions of Tommy Lynn Sells, who was a well-known serial killer, even though we have some strong suspicions and Sells admitted to some things, justice for the Dardeens is still kind of like a ghost that we can't quite catch. This case sticks with us, and it's got investigators, family, and friends scratching their heads trying to make sense of all the unanswered questions and all the different stories. This crime is like a big tangled web, and it reminds us how tricky criminal investigations can be, and it's a place where we don't always have the answers, and figuring out what's true and what's not can be confusing. While Sells told us some things that help, and there are still doubts about whether everything or anything he said is actually true. So as we think about this heartbreaking chapter in the Dardeens family and their life, we're reminded of how strong communities can be when faced with such confusing mysteries like this. We keep the memory of Elaine, Peter, and the baby who never got to grow up in our hearts, and their stories remind us of how much pain a terrible act like this can cause. Thank you guys so much for checking out the video. That's all we got for today when we talk about the Dardeen family. Go ahead and let me know what you guys think. I think that it's entirely possible that he could have made up a bunch of information, so I don't think it's 100% certain that it was Sells, but it's definitely possible. But there's the fact that the story changed so many times that holds up my belief in being able to confirm whether or not he is 100% responsible. But yeah, thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I'm going to link all my personal socials down below in the description. I'm hoping to do this series and also have it over on audio platforms like on Spotify and stuff. So if you guys would be interested in maybe an audio only version of these videos, go ahead and let me know. But other than that, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you guys watching and checking out the content. I really do appreciate it, and I cannot say it anymore. Thank you guys, and have a good night.